establishing central dominance right away, controlling key squares and preparing for rapid piece development. Black immediately aims for a fianchetto, creating a dynamic pawn structure and controlling key diagonals that will influence the center. Instantly seizing central space with pawns, white challenges black's fianchetto and prepares swift development. Unleashing the fianchettoed bishop unleashes a potent diagonal pressure, eyeing the center and offering dynamic counterplay. Securing the center and expanding influence across the queen side, white establishes a dominant pawn structure. Solidifying the center and enabling further piece development, this anchors black's pawn structure. Developing a knight here immediately contests the center and prepares to castle, solidifying the central pawn structure and aiming for rapid piece activity. Knight to c6 asserts central presence, challenging white's pawn structure and preparing for potential pawn thrusts, a common idea in this king's Indian setup. Developing the bishop to e3 solidifies the pawn center and prepares to castle kingside while keeping an eye on potential pawn breaks. Prying open the center decisively, this thrust immediately contests white's ambitious pawn chain and ignites potential for sharp central play. Pushing the pawn forward creates a central pawn chain, restricting black's knight mobility and opening a dynamic avenue for white's king's bishop. Sacrificing central space for a knight outpost, this gambit seeks to disrupt white's pawn structure and create immediate tactical opportunities. Aimed at solidifying the center, this piece aims to support the pawn chain and potentially participate in a kingside attack. Sacrificing the knight opens a crucial diagonal for your queen, aiming to exploit white's slightly exposed king. Opening the e-file for the rook now adds significant pressure to black's queenside pawn structure. Unleashing the kingside pawn storm, black boldly challenges white's central pawn chain and opens lines, albeit potentially weakening their own king's defenses. Solidifying the center, this pawn push strategically prevents further knight incursions and prepares for potential king's side play. Opening the f-file for the rook aims to dismantle white's pawn shield, but it also leaves the king exposed. Positioning the queen here prepares for a potential kingside attack, eyeing h6 and fostering piece coordination. Finally, securing the monarch offers a safe haven, preparing for queenside expansion and consolidating the central structure. Sacrificing the central pawn unlocks open lines, aiming to expose black's uncastled monarch and seize initiative. Unlocking the kingside's positional weaknesses, black's bishop now eyes the vital central squares, aiming to destabilize white's pawn structure. Exploiting the pawn chain's weakness, white aggressively expands on the kingside, aiming to destabilize black's monarch and open attacking lines. Brings the bishop back to its cozy diagonal, preparing for counterplay along the queenside after white's aggressive pawn push. Fortifying the king's flank provides crucial defense against potential pawn storms, though it might relinquish some dynamism. Solidifying kingside space and preparing queenside counterplay, this advance aims to restrict white's central pawn advances and develop new attacking avenues. Embracing the kingside by castling long opens a dynamic counterplay down the open queenside files. Unleashing a pawn storm on the queenside, black seeks to disrupt white's castled king and open lines for counterplay. Opening the c-file creates immediate pawn tension and a potential pathway for your rook. Aggressively carving out queenside space disrupts white's central control and initiates a thematic pawn race. Unleashing the knight to a central outpost disrupts black's queenside expansion and creates immediate attacking chances. This pawn thrust aggressively probes for weaknesses, aiming to disrupt white's queenside structure and potentially open lines for black's attack. Pushing the bishop forward contests the central dark squares and prepares for potential kingside pawn advances. Preparing to contest the queenside open files, eyeing potential breakthroughs. Clearing the c-file opens avenues for relentless pawn pressure, aiming to fracture black's kingside defense. Reconnecting the bishop to the queenside defense solidifies black's structure. Initiating a kingside pawn storm, aiming to crack open black's defenses while neglecting the queenside skirmish. Opening the file for aggressive queen infiltration, black seeks to disrupt white's kingside castling and exploit the newly created space. Sacrificing a knight to disrupt black's queenside pawn structure creates new attacking avenues on the kingside. Regaining the material opens up black's queenside pawns to potential weakness. Unleashing a pawn storm to pry open the kingside, demanding immediate attention and potentially creating devastating mating threats. Reassessing the bishop's role, this repositioning aims to defend the kingside and potentially support a queenside counter. Reactivating the bishop to control key diagonals and support the central pawn majority. The bishop retreats, seeking safety and redeploying to a more active diagonal to support the queenside. Asserting presence on the kingside, this pawn advance threatens to unravel black's defenses and open new attacking avenues. Recapturing the pawn on f5 finally frees the bishop, unblocking the central structure and potentially initiating counterplay. Opening that kingside file exposes the enemy monarch to immediate danger and creates new avenues for attack. Recapturing with the bishop reestablishes material balance, but leaves the kingside structure compromised and vulnerable to further pawn advances. Preparing a flank thrust, aiming to exploit the open lines created by the pawn storm on the queenside. Unleashing the rook creates immediate pressure on the kingside, forcing white to confront the exposed king. Striking at the pinned, bishop frees the g-file for a decisive assault on the weakened king. Opening the king's defense this way invites serious threats, fundamentally altering the board's tactical landscape. Seizing the initiative, white aggressively targets the weakened king's defenses, creating immediate threats. Securing the king from the immediate storm becomes paramount, seeking refuge from the open files. Unleashing an attack on the weakened king requires meticulous attention to piece activity. This offers white an opportunity to simplify into a favorable rook endgame by trading queens, a good practical choice. Unleashing a pawn storm now aims to expose the black king to crushing diagonal attacks. Seeking an escape route, black opens a line toward white's exposed king. Trading queens simplifies into a potentially winning endgame for white, leveraging the passed pawn. The rook now activates, eyeing the weakened king and potential open files. Securing the open f-file consolidates white's advantage and pressures black's weakened pawn structure. A well-timed exchange that clears the path for the rook to reach its final destination. Forces the exchange of remaining rooks, simplifying into a king and pawn endgame where material advantage is key. Safeguarding the king is paramount. This repositioning allows him breathing room amidst the open lines. The rook infiltrates, targeting the 7th rank and aiming to exploit the weakened kingside structure. Seeking refuge on the only open file, but the bishop pair still looms large. The king steps out, seeking safety from the open files and potential checks on the back rank. Injecting immediate central pawn tension by attacking the defending king's remaining protection. Securing the queenside pawn chain is crucial, preventing queenside infiltration. Black mobilizes the bishop, eyeing the exposed white king and preparing for potential infiltration. Anchoring the king in the center, this maneuver aims to shield the monarch from the lingering rook menace while preparing for potential pawn advances. Stepping the bishop onto its most active diagonal offers a dynamic defense, aiming to disrupt white's advanced pawn structure. Repositioning the king towards the center begins a new phase of the game, aiming to activate it in the upcoming endgame scenario. A bold repositioning aims to disrupt white's control over the central files, seeking new avenues for counterplay despite the pawn structure weakness. The bishop's foray to a7 aims to exploit black's weakened dark squares and potential invasion routes along the b-file, promising positional pressure.